Greetings. Today I'd like to share with you about the Kaulasūtras. This is a very interesting, unpublished text from the Krama tradition of non-dual Shaiva Tantra. Well, it's not officially affiliated with the Krama, also known as the Mahartha lineage, also known as the Mahānaya lineage, but it has very, very strong affinities with Krama teachings. And it also has very strong affinities with the teachings of the Chumma Sanketa Prakasha, which I have already posted a video about. And the Kaulasūtra is very fascinating. It has some really beautiful teachings. There's about 65 sutras, although we have good reason to believe there used to be more. And the manuscript that has come down to us is incomplete. So that's too bad, but there's still a lot there that's very interesting and some really exquisite teachings I'll share with you in just a moment. So I also just want to make it clear, because a lot of people don't know this, that the number of unpublished sources on classical Tantra, the number of unpublished Sanskrit sources far outweighs the number that have been published, which itself far outweighs the number that have been translated. That is to say, when people study, what they call Kashmir Shaivism, what I prefer to call non-dual Shaiva Tantra, because it wasn't confined to the region of Kashmir in any way, they tend to study certain key works, and they don't realize that the works that are published and translated, some of them are absolutely central and crucial and important, but there are others that are equally central and crucial and important that were not published and not translated for basically reasons of historical accident, like not having access to the requisite manuscripts at the time that such publications were being funded, okay? So there's much more to discover. If you're interested in classical Tantra and specifically Shakta Shaiva Tantra, there's much more to discover, much more to be translated and published than has been so far. And this is one of those very interesting key texts that we hope to get published in the coming years. So I just want to share with you the first three Kaulasūtras. Now, the word Kaula, of course, refers to not one specific lineage, but a whole vast group of lineages, right? All the lineages of non-dual goddess worshipping, transgressive Shaiva Tantra or Shakta Tantra tend to be grouped under this rubric of Kaula. It's all the lineages that in some way or another look back to Machandanatha and his consort Konkanamba as a lineage head in some sense. So anyway, the Kaulasūtra. Let's get to the juicy part, which is the actual sutras themselves. Number 1. Avichinnam ovali kramayata marichi sankramanam evaiko guruhu, which means there is only one guru, the unbroken transmission of the shining rays of awakened awareness passed on to us through lineage. So this is a really fascinating redefinition of what the term guru means. Because, of course, a guru is usually taken to be an authoritative teacher, a spiritual teacher, right? A spiritual teacher who has some degree of attainment, awakening, enlightenment, liberation, call it what you will. But here, the Kaulasūtras redefine what the term guru means by saying it's not a person, and it's not even one specific lineage as opposed to others. It's in fact transmission itself, sankramanam, transmission of what? Of the rays of awakened awareness, the energy, if you will, of awakened awareness that comes to us through lineage, through any living lineage, right? So let's break this down a little bit. First, what do they mean by an unbroken transmission that comes down through lineage? They're not talking about officially documented lineages. They're just talking about the fact that awakeness sparks in a student or disciple of one who is authentically awake, that it doesn't always happen that way. It doesn't have to happen that way, but that's the most common way that it happens, okay? And this is, you know, a concept that's known in multiple cultures, by the way, not just Indian culture and the Asian cultures influenced by it. In fact, even Plato in the Greek tradition once said, sometimes when a student sits in the presence of a teacher, a spark flies from the heart of the teacher into the heart of the student, and the fire thus kindled can never be extinguished. So hard to know, of course, if he's really talking about the same thing, but it certainly sounds very similar to what's being discussed here. And so what we need to understand is that the modern phenomenon of attributing the power of transmission to the guru is misconstrued from the point of view of this more ancient tradition, meaning to say it's not the personage of the guru who causes transmission to occur. So, you know, some gurus like to suggest exactly that. They like to suggest, I have the power to give you this transmission because such a suggestion is very profitable for them to make. Let's put it that way. But in fact, transmission can happen anytime, anywhere, from anyone who's on fire with the process of awakening, even if their awakening is not yet complete as a process or not yet fully integrated, okay? Because transmission is said to be like dry kindling placed next to a blazing fire can spontaneously catch fire, right? And so there need be no specific intention. And the person through whom the transmission flows need not be an officially consecrated guru, or they might be, right? But transmission is simply an intuitive recognition on the part of the one receiving the transmission that some sort of different paradigm is possible and is indeed not only possible, but apparent in the person from whom they receive the transmission. Now, transmission can happen, of course, not just in person in live teaching and learning scenarios, but it can happen through a book or a recording, you know, a video, an audio, you know, anything that carries the energy of the awakened state in one way or another. So transmission is considered in the tradition to be a powerful force that is not hindered by any, you know, mundane things. It's not hindered by technology. Yes, you could theoretically receive transmission through a YouTube video. But there we have to be careful, of course, because it's not an altered state of consciousness or spontaneously entering into a trance or feeling some emotion. That's not evidence of transmission. What's evidence of transmission is that the awakening process authentically begins, or if it's already begun, it leaps forward in a substantial way, which is then sustained over time. Meaning to say, it's not an experience that we're talking about, right? You can watch a moving video by a great speaker and feel something emotionally or have an experience, you know. But here we're talking about something different. We're talking about transmission, which engenders in the one receiving it a paradigm shift, or more of a paradigm shift, right? So a transmission, it never goes to waste, is the way the tradition sees it. And so if there's a momentary opening, but then the person just returns to their default state, and that seed doesn't take root, as it were, then it was an experience, and maybe even a valuable one, but it wasn't actually an awakening. Okay, so the idea here then, again, is that lineage means the fact that the energy of awakening can pass from one human being to another, whether they're officially a teacher or not, and whether they're officially a student or not. It can happen in these formal contexts for sure, and often does, with consecrated and officially recognized teachers and disciples, or it can happen in entirely informal contexts, and it can happen to somebody who doesn't consider themselves a student or disciple or anything like that. So it's a mysterious power, and this power of transmission is said to be avachinnam in the sutra. It's said to be unbroken and indeed unbreakable, right? When it seems to be blocked in one direction, it finds a new direction, right? So if some guru were to consecrate a successor who didn't actually have any attainment, then the energy of awakening just flows in a different direction. There might be some, humble student of that same guru, not consecrated as a successor, but through whom the energy of the transmission of awakening begins to flow. Just, throwing out some hypothetical examples. So, but what's important here in the sutra is that it says there is only one guru, which is this transmission of awakened awareness. So in other words, the guru is not a person, but the fact of transmission itself, whenever the transmission is happening, that is to be venerated as the guru. And so, somebody who's sharing and teaching the traditional practices and philosophy of any given lineage could be a vehicle for transmission in one moment and not in another moment. And that's not really up to them. Again, it's a sort of mysterious power. Why does transmission happen in one moment and not in another, when the same teachers gathered with many of the same students? Who knows? It's something mysterious, but it's perhaps not entirely dissimilar to what can happen with a great musical artist or a great band when they're really having a good day and really connecting with their audience, and they're able to create music, or improvisation that's much, much more impactful, and that in fact conveys an energy which is much more than the sum of its parts. Now, that is a mundane example. I'm not saying it's the same thing, right? I'm saying that that's an example in the arena of artistic expression of a somewhat similar phenomenon, that somehow that the audience that a musician is playing for influences the way the music manifests, right? And something can happen, a kind of transmission of artistic inspiration, which doesn't happen in certain other moments, even if the same notes are being played. So just to try to draw a parallel, because some of you might have experienced that, but and not yet the spiritual version, right? But the spiritual version is, of course, completely distinct from any other analogy that we can draw, because unlike in the case of the transmission of artistic inspiration, awakening, if it does take root, is not possible to be effaced again, right? Transmission of awakened awareness causes us to see reality in a way that can't be unseen, and therefore it is unfailing, right? So there's much more I could say about this, but this is just a sort of initial overview of this particular sutra, which again says there is only one guru, the unbroken transmission of the shining rays of awakened awareness passed on to us through lineage. And then the second sutra says, there is only one God, the reality that one perceives through that transmission. So this is interesting. The text, the scripture, is not only redefining what guru means, but redefining what God means, where God is here defined as tattva, reality itself, but the reality that one can only see with the sort of clarified vision, the clarified sense of sight granted by the awakening process, right? So in Sanskrit it says, tad upalabdham eva tattvam eko devaha. So deva, God, is defined as tattva, reality, but specifically the reality that is upalabdha, that is grasped or comprehended or perceived through that, meaning through that transmission referenced in the previous sutra. So this is fascinating because these sutras are coming in a culture that very much venerates all sorts of specific manifestations of deity, right? You're familiar with deities like Shiva, or Buddhist deities like Avalokiteshvara. And the Tantric tradition is absolutely chock full of deities. And here, and by the way, the word deva translates as deity, or it translates as God with a capital G in certain contexts as well, in monotheistic contexts. But here, the text is saying there is in fact only one deva, there's only one God, and that is tattva, the reality that one perceives through that transmission of awakened awareness. So it's said, of course, that awakening is precisely that process which allows us to be in touch with reality independently of our mental filters, which many people today don't even think is possible. But the experience, or rather the paradigm shift of awakening, shows the person to whom it occurs that it certainly is possible, and no one to whom it occurs doubts that it is possible, and yet they cannot prove to anyone to whom it hasn't occurred that it's possible. So only the actual paradigm shift of awakening can demonstrate to the one who has it that it really is possible to see reality independently of your mental filters, independently of your psychology, we could say, independently of your past history, independently even of your individuality, certainly independently of your identity, independently of all that. That's tattva, that is reality unfiltered, right? So this unfiltered reality, this raw, real, powerful, vivid, visceral, embodied, alive experience of reality as such is what's being referred to here, right? So it's what is before you have a thought about it, before you formulate an interpretation, before you have a story about it, right? But that, for most people, that what is before you have a thought about it, it lasts only a split second. And here in the paradigm shift of awakenings, it opens up, that split second, as it were, opens up, and you're able to actually be in this state of clear seeing, free of mental filters. And of course, being free of mental filters, what can you say about it? You can't. You can try to characterize it, but anything you say about this mode of seeing is going to be a metaphor, an analogy, because you can't, in fact, describe it precisely because it is free of mental filters. So there's much more that could be said about that. Here I'm just doing a short video, a little overview of these first three sutras, right? But a really fascinating, even captivating redefinition of what deity or God means. Only the reality that one perceives through the awakening process or through awake awareness. And then in the third sutra, we get another example of this construction. We had, there is only one guru, there is only one God. And in the third sutra, we learn it has only one chit shakti, power of awareness. Okay, so the text is playing with the fact that in most tantric traditions, you have this dyad of Shiva and Shakti, of deity and his power personified as the goddess, right? And here that is being redefined, right? Because God is being redefined as reality, the reality perceivable only through awakened awareness. And that deity has only one Shakti, has only one power, specifically Chit Shakti, one power of awareness, which is here defined as Sahajaham Bhava Bhumihi, the inner ground that is the unconstructed I sense. Or we could translate the state of natural self-awareness. So I'll read the whole sutra just as it is. Tasyaika sahajaham bhava bhumihi chit shaktihi. It has only one, it, that deity, that divinity, that reality, has only one power of awareness. The inner ground that is the unconstructed I sense. So what does that word unconstructed mean? Well, it's sahaja in Sanskrit, which means natural, spontaneous, naturally occurring, unconstructed. But so this is the unconstructed I sense. So therefore, by definition, it's not the ego, which is constructed, right? Ego is constructed identity, socially and culturally constructed identity. Whereas this is the unconstructed I sense. So it's the I sense, the immediate sense of your own being prior to any thought or story about yourself, right? So that immediate sense of your own being prior to and free from all your self-images, self-concepts, and self-stories, right? So all that is like sort of the driftwood, the flotsam and jetsam floating on the ocean of pure being, which is constantly present, yet for most people, constantly overlooked as well. And that's a fascinating thing, how almost everyone manages to constantly overlook that which they fundamentally are, and instead be almost wholly engaged with the driftwood floating on the surface of the ocean of their being, right? So again, we could translate the inner ground that is the unconstructed I sense, or we could just translate the state of natural self-awareness, which might be easier to understand, but it also conveys less of what's meant, right? Because self-awareness is a sort of ambiguous term. So here we're talking about awareness of the unconstructed self, right? Being itself. So this has nothing to do with individuality, right? Which itself is a construct. It has to do with this immediate sense of beingness. I sometimes call it awareness presence, or other times just beingness, which constitutes an inner ground. So there, we have that word in the sutra as well, bhumi, that there's an inner ground constituted by this unconstructed I sense. What does it mean to call it a ground? It means that it's a place within ourselves where we can come to rest fully, right? So when you come to rest within your own innate beingness, the way you experience reality shifts and changes. There's a profound peace or a deep sense of okayness, clarity, tranquility, openness, right? All of this is the natural byproducts of coming to rest in the inner ground of your being. Here defined as this unconstructed I sense, this state of natural self-awareness. So much more could be said about this sutra as well. And eventually I'll be offering retreats based on the Kaulasūtras. I'm translating a bunch of them this week together with my colleague Ben Williams. And I'd like to show you one of the manuscripts we're working with. So there's a manuscript of the Kaulasūtras written in Sanskrit language, of course, but using the Sharada script instead of the more commonly known Devanagari script. So this writing system for Sanskrit language flourished in Kashmir. So this is a Kashmiri manuscript. You can know that just by seeing the script, because only Kashmir used the Sharada script. But anyway, you might notice more immediately the fact that it is completely eaten up by moths or some other insect, and you know that it's barely survived down to the present day, and all the leaves of this particular manuscript are like this. Thankfully, we have other manuscripts to compare it with and to come up with a readable version of the text, right? So look out for more Kaulasūtras, and these first three together constitute a kind of complete teaching. It's really, really profound to contemplate all the implications of these three sutras. So I'll finish by just reading them together, all three together, because maybe there's a deeper understanding that comes when you hear them in juxtaposition without the translator's commentary. Avachinnam ovali kramayata marichi sankramanam evaiko guruhu. There is only one guru, the unbroken transmission of the shining rays of awakened awareness passed on to us through lineage. Tad upalabdham eva tattvam eko devaha. There is only one God, the reality one perceives through that transmission of awakened awareness. Tasyaika sahajaham bhava bhumi chit shakti. It has only one power of awareness, the inner ground of the unconstructed I sense. The state of natural self-awareness. Om. And if you'd like to learn more about the Kaulasūtras or support the work of translation and bringing these previously unknown texts to light, please head over to tantrailluminated.org and become a member of our growing and flourishing community. tantrailluminated.org. Thank you for your time and attention.